This is Seoul Station. It's the largest railway station in Korea, connecting 9 bus platforms, 2 metro lines, the airport express train, national trains, and almost every high-speed train line in the country. But it's more than a crucial transport hub for this city of 10 million residents. Just look at a picture of the station and you'll see how it's a symbol of Seoul and South Korea's meteoric rise over the past century from a war-torn former Japanese colony to a highly advanced world economy.
Expand the nationwide rail network, connect the government and companies to maximize their capacities.
When the Korean War ended in 1953, the city was in tatters from war, but now it has become one of the most modern cities in the world. What's incredible is how quickly this city has grown over the past 70 years and how it has become a world-class city despite lacking any clear plan. The city government's main task over the past few decades has been fixing past mistakes to make Seoul a megacity with world-leading transportation, housing, and urban planning. Some of these efforts have proved massive successes, while others have fallen shockingly short. But more on that in a minute. The dazzling modernity of Seoul hides some surprising truths, notably the fact that it's actually a very old city. The city has been inhabited for thousands of years and has been known by many names, with the first historical record dating back to 18 BC. This makes it younger than most Chinese cities, but much older than Japan's megacities like Osaka and Tokyo. What's surprising is that despite being so old, you would hardly know it if you visited Seoul. Apart from the few palaces and city gates that remain from its long history and one neighborhood where traditional houses still stand, Seoul is a recently built city. In 2012, only 7% of buildings in the city were over 30 years old. And there's a good reason for this. See, Seoul was the setting for 3 different battles during the Korean War, leaving much of its existing housing heavily damaged. Following the Korean War armistice in 1953, massive flows of war refugees settled in the city. And these people needed housing. Seoul almost doubled in area during the early 1960s, and its urbanization happened over a much shorter time span than most other developing countries. The city's booming population led to substandard housing known as panjaeshon, or literally wood-board villages, which had grown to a third of the city's housing, or over 136,000 units by 1966. But this situation wouldn't last. This is Park Chung-hee. He was a high-ranking officer in the South Korean army who sparked a coup in 1961 and was elected president in 1963. His presidency, which later became a dictatorship, was marked by rapid economic growth and top-down decision-making. At this point, Park Chung-hee cracked down on illegal settlements, sending out officials to patrol regularly for illegal construction and even taking aerial photos 4 times a year to track the settlements from above. One positive effect of the government's authoritarian top-down planning style was the creation of Seoul's Greenbelt in 1970. This 10-kilometer wide area around the city helped contain Seoul's sprawl and protect its surrounding nature. Although inspired by London's Greenbelt, the one in Seoul had a surprising advantage, limiting development near the border with North Korea, which lies about 30 miles or 48 kilometers to the north of the city. As the government focused on the housing needs of growing middle class, the poor were pushed to remote shanty towns built on mountainsides called moon villages, as they seemed closer to the moon than the city. While many countries facing similar housing shortages at the time opted to build public housing in droves, South Korea did not, because they chose a different path. Following the example of Japan, the Korean government became a developmental state, planning the country's overall economic direction as an export economy, while letting a few conglomerate companies develop new industries. These companies, or chaebol, have become name brands around the world. In fact, you're probably familiar with major ones like Hyundai, Samsung, and LG. Instead of building much public housing, the government took a specifically South Korean approach and let the deep-pocketed chaebol like Samsung, Hyundai, and Daewoo build housing. The Korean government helped group small plots of land for chaebol to develop into large apartment complexes called danji. In the 1970s, urban development projects offered an easy excuse to clear substandard housing from central areas like Gangnam and gentrify the area with new apartment complexes. The apartment development method worked like this. First, property owners in soon-to-be redeveloped areas formed an association to sell their property to developers. Secondly, the developer sells new apartments to existing owners at the price it costs to build, but builds more units than there are property owners, so they sell the surplus units for a huge profit. These companies enjoyed massive profits because homeowners were not allowed to upgrade existing properties after 1973, creating a rent gap between older properties and new high-rise apartments. The developers didn't bother to build unprofitable, low-income housing, further increasing their profits. Many in the emerging middle class invested in the property boom and profited, but millions were too poor to benefit, becoming victims of the chaebol real estate construction complex. Existing tenants in dilapidated properties were evicted before construction. Poor property owners who couldn't afford the new apartment could sell their right to buy it to speculators but had to accept a price far below the market rate. Throughout the 1970s, the real estate market was rife with speculation, and the chaebol profited from the skyrocketing land prices by building apartment complexes and massively acquiring real estate. In the 1980s, the government modified its approach as the subpar housing disappeared from central Seoul. Instead, developers targeted low-rise housing under 30 years old for reconstruction as high-rise apartment blocks. Over the decades, developers completely reshaped the city, making high-rise apartments the norm in Seoul. But as modern as they may seem, the apartment blocks were in some ways a continuation of the Korean way of life. The apartment floor plans were built around a central room, echoing the central courtyard in traditional homes. High-rise apartments were also equipped with heated floors that mimic the ondol or in-floor heating system in traditional Korean homes. And for those who weren't lucky enough to buy a home, a frankly bizarre alternative to renting carried on. Called a jeonse, which I probably butchered, you basically take out a loan for 50% to 90% of the apartment's market value to give the owner as a lump sum. After 2 years, the owner returns the money to the tenant who doesn't have to pay rent. The landlord makes a profit by reinvesting this deposit in the housing market and keeping the interest. This approach works great as long as the housing market is booming, and Seoul in the 1960s and 70s was a booming city, with 286,000 people moving in every year from 1965 to 1991. And it kind of goes without saying that any growing city needs a way to move people around. Seoul's tram system, a relic dating from even before the Japanese colonial era, kept puttering along until 1968. Buses gradually replaced trams, but soon met limitations in a city filled with more and more cars. In 1971, the first line of Seoul's metro finally began construction, with Line 1 using the classic cut and cover construction method. Line 1 opened in 1974, Line 2 opened in 1980, and Lines 3 and 4 followed in 1985. The number of metro commutes grew each year, finally hitting capacity by the end of the 1980s. And in 1988, a huge event happened that changed Korean history. The 1988 Seoul Olympics were an opportunity to celebrate Korea's rapid rise. At first, the looming event seemed to worsen the symptoms of Korea's development model. Korean construction companies rushed to build new buildings, fueling the city's ongoing real estate speculation. Thousands of homeless were arrested and evicted from encampments, and shantytowns were dismantled. This inadvertently created more shantytowns like the still existing Goryeo village, but they were relegated to the far edges of town. But the other side of the Olympic coin was that the world's eyes were on Seoul. Badly needed green spaces like the Olympic Park and Han River Citizen Park were added to beautify the city. And crucially, massive protests in the spring of 1988 forced the government of President Chun Doo-hwan to allow a new constitution and democratic elections later that year. So then South Korea ended its dictatorship and became a democracy. Seoul peaked at 10.6 million residents in 1990, entering a new era. The top-down decision style was over as the country became decentralized, and for the first time since 1961, city residents could finally vote for mayor of Seoul starting in 1995. But in the mid-90s, the side effects of the country's super-speed development started to show. On October 21st, 1994, a portion of a bridge in central Seoul collapsed into the Han River, killing 32 people and injuring 17 more. The bridge, it turned out, had been shoddily constructed just 15 years earlier and had not been properly maintained. The next year, a 5-story department store in Seoul's Seoul district collapsed, killing 502 people and injuring 937. The management ignored cracks that had appeared months before, even refusing to evacuate customers when a collapse was imminent to avoid losing out on sales. The company's director, Lee Jun, was sentenced to prison for criminal negligence, and his son also faced jail time. The company ceased to exist after compensating the victims. Still, Seoul continued to develop, expanding its metro network across the Han River for the first time, and adding more lines like Line 5 in 1995 and Line 7 and 8 in 1996. But the decades-long economic miracle on the Han River was about to come to a halt. The rapid expansion of chaebols abroad was funded by more and more loans. Eventually, underperforming companies couldn't pay back their loans, and the financial crisis that had started in Thailand reached Korea. The 1997 Asian financial crisis dropped the value of the Korean won by 50% in 6 months, requiring Korea to take a record-breaking $57 billion bailout from the IMF. Several large Korean companies like Daewoo Motors and Kia were sold off to other companies. The national and local governments couldn't take on more debt, so metro expansion came to a halt and future plans were cancelled. Eventually, the country started to recover and Metro Line 6 opened in 2000. Line 9 finally followed in 2009. But the metro couldn't fix all of the city's transportation woes. The share of buses as a mode of transport had steadily dropped from 70% in 1970 to less than 30% in 2000. While the metro expansion was important, car ownership had also become more popular over the years in Seoul, especially as the country's domestic auto industry expanded. In 2003, the Seoul Metropolitan Government aimed to change this trend by redesigning the city's transport system. They digitized their bus management system to help buses run on time, and created a no driving day where citizens can volunteer to take public transport one day of the week in exchange for lower car tax and some parking and toll discount. In 2014, 1/3 of vehicles in the city were equipped with the RFID tags needed to participate in the program. But one major visible improvement in the city is this, the Cheongyu Stream. In 2005, the city uncovered this stream that had long been hidden under asphalt and a highway overpass, turning it into a park flowing 2 kilometers through the city center. It has brought a slice of nature into central Seoul and tied the surrounding neighborhoods together by creating a gathering place for residents. The stream restoration lowered temperatures during summer and stopped the annual flooding in the downtown area. And that's something to celebrate, as flooding remains a major issue for the city. The city experienced a major flood in 1988, 87, 1990, 98, 2001, 2011, and 2022. See, Seoul is surrounded by mountains and the city itself is on low-lying, mostly flat areas. To make matters worse, Korea experiences monsoon rains every year, with 2/3 of its annual rainfall falling from June to September. The rapid development of Seoul quickly covered land in buildings and asphalt, reducing its natural capacity to absorb water. Now climate change is making the flooding worse, forcing the city to upgrade its drainage, rainwater pumping systems, and sewage facilities. After the heaviest rainfall in 115 years hit the city and flooded the wealthy Gangnam district especially hard, the government announced a $1.15 billion project to expand the city's drainage infrastructure. They plan to build 6 large-scale rainwater storage facilities deep underground that can handle up to 110 millimeters of rain per hour, 10 millimeters more than the 2022 floods. 3 of the facilities are slated for completion in 2027, so hopefully there will be no more major floods before then. In addition to the city's natural tendency for flooding, Seoul's rapid expansion created a deadly flaw for its poorest residents. If you've seen the movie Parasite, you might have an idea where I'm going with this. See, despite decades of growth, the city never properly built housing for low-income residents. Aside from a mere 165,000 units of public housing, The last pancheon in Seoul were demolished by the 1990s, and only a handful of shanty towns remain in remote outskirts, leaving the city's 300,000 basement apartments as the best option for its least fortunate residents. 40,000 of these are in low-lying flood-prone areas. With the apartments lower than the sewer, they can easily flood from an overloaded sewer. And in areas prone to floods, rainwater can also come in through the windows and doors. The tragically flawed design became apparent again just 2 years ago, in August 2022, when 9 people drowned to death in their own homes. Despite the country's colossal economic rise, Seoul remains a city of stark inequalities. In 2012, about 29% of households in the city were considered low income, with the middle class making up 37% and high income households the remaining third. And the numbers are even worse for the elderly. Today, nearly 4 in 10 older adults in Seoul live in poverty. While this number is slowly dropping, it's still nearly double the rate in the US and actually the world's highest elderly poverty rate. While many Koreans were able to enter the middle class during the 20th century housing boom and purchase their own home, many others missed out. And now it's too late. From 1963 to 2007, the price of land in Seoul grew by 1,176 times, while incomes only grew 15 times. Now, prices are so high that many young people may never have the opportunity to become homeowners. Among those aged 20 to 39, only 17% owned their home. In 2023, the average house for a high-rise apartment in Seoul was around $3,150 per square meter. At first, it doesn't sound so bad considering the average apartment in Paris sells for over 3 times that, but when you consider income disparities, a different picture emerges. In Seoul, the price-to-income ratio of a home is 24.9, meaning it would take someone 24.9 years of saving their entire income to buy their own home. When you look at other major cities like Tokyo, New York, Paris, and London, the rates are much lower, although Chinese cities like Beijing and Shanghai are actually far worse. While it's certainly not the only factor, skyrocketing housing costs have worsened Korea's dropping birth rate, which is the lowest in the world. In 2021, Seoul's fertility rate was 0.62, even lower than the country's rate of 0.8. and far below the level of 2 needed to maintain stable population growth. Seoul has become expensive, and its 9.6 million residents are cramped in a city with twice the population density of New York City. This reality and the housing crisis help explain why Seoul's population has been dropping for many years. Over the past decade, the city has lost 860,000 people, with most of those people leaving due to housing. But they didn't actually have to go that far. See, beyond the Greenbelt lies the Gyeonggi province, which is part of the Greater Seoul region. Right next to Seoul is Incheon, the 3rd largest city in Korea with 3 million residents. 427,000 Seoulites moved to Incheon over the past decade due to its lower cost of housing. But they didn't have to make that many sacrifices. Aside from a longer commute, Incheon has 2 of its own metro lines, which are connected to Seoul's now extensive network of 9 metro lines and 12 commuter rail lines. The Incheon airport serves as the main airport for the Seoul region and connects to downtown Seoul via the Airport Railroad Express train. And what's crazy is that it's built on land that didn't exist before 1992. In 2023, Incheon International Airport welcomed 56 million passengers, which is more than the entire population of South Korea. But the exodus from Seoul goes even further. Head 125 kilometers or 80 miles south of Seoul and you'll find Sejong City, a new capital city under construction for years. Despite resistance from some politicians and government workers, the new city already has over 360,000 residents and is expected to grow to 500,000 residents by its completion in 2030. Dozens of government ministries have been moving there since 2012, and current South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol supports moving the capital there entirely. Perhaps we can get into the details of the project in another video, but the new capital just makes sense. Seoul is overcrowded and expensive, and the country's economy is overly concentrated in one area. The Seoul capital area, which includes Seoul, Incheon, and the Gyeonggi province, is home to 26 million people, or just over half the entire country's population. What's more, given that Seoul is hardly prepared for North Korean invasion, moving the capital an hour and a half south of Seoul is a smart move. Sejong City is much farther from the North Korean border than Seoul, which lies only 48 kilometers from the DMZ. From residents moving away to the construction of a new capital, today's exodus from Seoul is a symptom of its success. As South Korea emerged as a developed country, Seoul has corrected many of the past mistakes resulting from a lack of planning to become a global city. It has reclaimed its history, demolishing a Japanese-era government building to rebuild the historic Gyeongbuk Palace in a 40-year-long rebuilding and restoration effort. It has a world-class transportation system, has embraced smart city technologies like mobile voting, and even boasts the world's 5th tallest building. But major challenges lie ahead. 16.8% of Seoul residents are elderly, and with a dropping birth rate and a life expectancy of 84.8 years, taking care of older residents will become a bigger burden on the city over time. The city currently faces an illegal parking problem with few parking places available in low-rise neighborhoods and insufficient fees, leaving many to park without paying. In the short term, the city government aims to use connected sensors to detect empty parking spaces. In the long term, they will discourage car use by allowing buildings with 0 parking spaces and improving public transport. We'll have to see if these strategies pan out, but all in all, I think Seoul has done a pretty great job. What do you think? Let us know in the comments down below. But that's it for this video, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.